Chapter 1. By midnight he knows his discontent will not let him sleep. The Panzer boy drives north from Santa Fe over the Sangre de Cristos, on the high road through Truchas, heading for Colorado, wanting to get as close as possible to the night sky. He drives without the use of hands or feet, his mind living in the cool neural interface that exists somewhere between the swift images that pass before his windscreen and the electric awareness that is the alloy body and liquid crystal heart of the Maserati. His artificial eyes, plastic and steel, stare unblinking at the road, at twisting dirt ruts corrugated by the spring runoff, tall stands of pine and aspen, high meadows spotted with the frozen black shapes of cattle, all outlined in the rushing, almost liquid light of his high beams as he pushes the Maserati upward. The shapes that blaze in the headlights stand boldly against the darkness of their own shadows, and Cowboy can almost see himself in a monochrome world like a black and white celluloid image projected before his windscreen, flickering with the speed of his passage. It's almost like flying. He'd thought, when he got his new Kikuyu eyes, that he'd ask for a monochrome option, amused by the idea of flicking some mental switch in his head and being plunged into the action of some black and white fantasy, an old moving picture starring the likes of Gary Cooper or Duke Wayne. But there hadn't been much demand for monochrome, and the option had been discontinued. He'd also wanted irises of chrome steel, but the Dodger, his manager, had talked him out of that, saying they were too conspicuous for a man in Cowboy's line of business. Cowboy agreed reluctantly, as he always did when the Dodger came up with a new restriction on his fantasy. Instead, he'd taken pupils of a storm cloud gray. But here, in these mountains named after the blood of Christ, are fantasies older than any on celluloid. They pass in montage before his steel and plastic eyes. An old whitewashed church, the area around its doors painted like a turquoise heaven, clashing with the reds and yellows that form a pyramid and all-seeing eye at the rounded cap of the arch. Some massive white castle in the Moroccan style, the playhouse of a long-vanished Arab, its crumbling minarets streaked with brown, its rococo iron grillwork scored with advancing rust. Suddenly, around a curve, a pair of pale ghosts appear like figures of supernatural warning, Indian pilgrims dressed in white, from the cloth binding their foreheads and braiding their long hair to the white doe-skin moccasins that wink with silver buttons. Walking patiently by moonlight, a penance to the sanctuary at Chimayo, there to give thanks to the carved santos or ask the Virgin for a favor. Visions, like outposts of another time, preserved here on the high rim of Earth, shimmering in the sudden brightness of Cowboy's eyes. Cowboy pushes the machine to the max, redlining the scales on the dashboard. Flying at night is the thing he does best. The engine whine echoes from the trees, the hills. Wind gusts through the open windows, bringing the sharp smell of pine. Cowboy pictures the celluloid speeding through the projector, moving faster, images blurring. Neurons pulse their messages to the crystal in his head, transmitting his will to the throttle, the gears, the jouncing wheels. Now the Maserati is moving downhill, gaining speed as it races through the switchbacks, finally tearing across the surface of the Ford in front of Peñasco, throwing up a wall of mist that for a short moment reflects the headlights in rainbows, a hallucinatory shimmer on the edge of vision, a foreshadowing of color here in the monochrome world. It's dawn when the Maserati blurs across the Colorado line, and early morning by the time the bronze machine enters Custer County. The mountains are brown and green now, alive with pine and the mountain wind, the monochrome fantasy gone. Cowboy has friends here. He turns into a private dirt road, knowing there are electronics suddenly taking an interest in him. The road twists upward and ends at a high mountain meadow, landscaped flat and crisscrossed by the alpha of a private airstrip. Where the Black Deltas once flew on their occult midnight errands, grasses and flowers now grow in the cracks of the paving. Still visible is a gouge in the bright green aspens, where one jock overshot the strip with his wounded Delta and splashed himself and his cargo over a half-mile of mountainside. But the furrow is green again with saplings. The airfield is turning dreamlike now, a little fuzzy around the edges. But Cowboy does not intend that the memory should ever die. There are memories that live for him as his present reality does not, and he shines them daily like the finish of a fine new car to keep them bright. For 11 generations, Cowboy's ancestors farmed an area of southeastern New Mexico, living as dots on a featureless red plain as different from the world of the Sangre de Cristos as is the Ukraine from Peru. Every so often, one of Cowboy's family would shoulder a rifle and march off to fight for the United States, but they concentrated most of their energies on fighting the state of Texas. The Texans were water-hungry, consuming more than they could ever replenish, building at the finish vast pumps just a few inches over the Texas side of the border, sucking the alkaline New Mexico water across the line, stealing what others had so carefully preserved. Cowboy's people fought them, holding on to what they could until the last pump rattled dry and the dusty red earth rose on the wind and turned the world into a sand-blasting hurricane. Cowboy remembers his days in the Dust Bowl, living at his uncle's ranch after his father broke himself trying to hang on, existing inside a gray assortment of bleached planks on the edge of the desert the Texans had made, a place where red earth drifted inches deep behind the door whenever the wind blew, and days passed without seeing the sun as anything brighter than a ruddy, warm vagueness behind the scouring sand. Farming was impossible, and the family ran cattle instead, an occupation only slightly less precarious. The nearest town bragged about the number of churches it had, and Cowboy was raised in one of them, watching the congregation grow bleaker week by week, their skin turning gray, their eyes ever more desperate as they asked the Lord to forgive whatever sin had led them to this cleansing. Texans, once the enemy, wandered through on their way to somewhere else, living in cardboard boxes, in old automobiles that sat on blocks and had long ago lost their paint to the sand. The Rock War came and went, and things got harder. Hymns continued to be sung, liquor and cards forsworn, and notices of farm auctions continued to be posted at the courthouse. The Dodger was an older man who had moved to Colorado. When he came home, he drove a shiny automobile, and he didn't go to church. He chewed tobacco because chewing didn't interfere with his picking when, in his free time, he played left-handed mandolin with a jug band. The gray people in the church didn't like to talk about how he'd made his money. And one day, the Dodger saw a cowboy riding in a rodeo. The Dodger visited Uncle's ranch and arranged to borrow Cowboy for a while, even paid for his time. He got Cowboy some practice time on a flight simulator, and then made a call to a third man he knew. The rest, as the Dodger would say, is history. Cowboy was 16 when he took up flying. In his cracked old leather boots, he already stood 3 inches over 6 feet, and soon he stood miles taller, an atmosphere jock who spread his contrails from one coast to the other, delivering the mail being whatever it was that came his way. The orbitals and the customs people in the Midwest were just another kind of Texan, someone who wants to rape away the things that keep you alive, replacing nothing, leaving only desert. When the air defenses across the line got too strong, the jocks switched to Panzer, and the mail still got through. The new system had its challenges, but had it been up to Cowboy, he would never have left the skies. Now Cowboy is 25, getting a little old for this job, approaching the time when even hardwired neural reflexes begin to slacken. He disdains the use of headsets. His skull bears 5 sockets for plugging the peripherals directly into his brain, saving milliseconds when it counts. Most people wear their hair long to cover the sockets, afraid of being called button heads or worse. But Cowboy disdains that practice too. His fair hair is cropped close to the skull, and his black ceramic sockets are decorated with silver wire and turquoise chips. Here in the West, where people have an idea of what these things mean, he is regarded with a kind of awe. He has his nerves hardwired to the max, and Kikuyu optics eyes with all the available options. He has a house in Santa Fe and a ranch in Montana that his uncle runs for him, and he owns the family property in New Mexico and pays taxes on it like it was worth something. He has the Maserati and a personal aircraft, a business jet, and a stock portfolio and caches of gold. He's also got this place, this little meadow in the Colorado mountains, another cache, this one for memories that won't go away, and a discontent, formless but growing, that has led him here. He parks by the big camouflaged concrete hangar and unfaces the Maserati before the engine gives its final whimper. In the silence, he can hear the sound of a steel guitar from somewhere in the hangar and a stirring in the grass that is the first directionless movements of the afternoon's thermals. He walks to the hangar, unreels a jack from the lock, studs it into his head, and gives it the code. Past the metal door, there is a Wurlitzer, shiny chrome and bright fluorescent plastic, venting some old Woody Guthrie song into the huge cathedral space. Looming above are the matte black shapes of 3 deltas, their rounded forms obscure in the dim light, but giving an impression of massive power and appalling speed. Obsolete now, Cowboy bought them for a little more than the price of their engines when the Face Riders started using Panzers. Warren stands at his workbench in a pool of light, tinkering with a piece of a fuel pump. His lined face flickers blue with the video pictures Cowboy's arrival has prompted. He's got security cameras all over the place and cares for them with the same methodical diligence with which he keeps the Deltas ready to fly. He was a crew chief at Vandenberg in the day of the Rock War, and he did his duty, knowing that he could expect nothing for his diligence but to feel on the back of his neck for a fragment of a second the overpressure of a nickel-iron missile coming down through the atmosphere, followed by termination. But he did what he was trained to do, and got his cutter jocks up to fight for Earth against the orbitals, wishing them well with all his heart, hoping that a few, maybe, would say, "Here's one for Warren," when they burned an enemy. But the scenario turned out different from what he'd expected. Looking up into the night sky for the meteor that had his name on it, he saw the falling, blazing arcs all right, but it wasn't descending rocks that lit the night sky. It was his boys and their craft, the young, bright men with their azure silk neck scarves and their bright needle cutters coming down in pieces, failing systems giving their last electronic cries, blood streaking the insides of broken faceplates, ruptured oxidant tanks gushing white crystal plumes into the near vacuum. The last hope of Earth blown apart in the post-boost phase by the orbital Knights. For hours he waited at Vandenberg, hoping one of the jocks might bring a cripple in. None came. Next thing Warren knew, Earth had surrendered. The orbitals occupied Vandenberg, along with Orlando, Houston, and Cuba, and Warren survived because he was stationed at a place that was too valuable to destroy. There was a lot of talk about the resistance afterward, and Warren did his share of talking. Probably more than talking, if the story about a sabotaged shuttle carrying a cargo of executives from Tupolev IG to an impact on the Mojave could be given any credence. Warren's history after that grew a little more obscure, until he appeared working for the Third Men in Colorado and met Cowboy. The rest, as the Dodger would say, being history. "Hi, Cowboy," Warren says. He doesn't turn from his work. "Hi." Cowboy opens the front of the Wurlitzer. The lock hasn't worked in decades, and collects some quarters. He tells the machine to play some scratchy old country swing and then walks across the darkened hangar. "Low-pressure fuel turbo pump," Warren says. Disassembled, the pump looks like a plastic model kit for a Galapagos turtle. "Running red lights on my tests. See where the metal's bright, here where the blade is rubbing? I think I may have to machine a new part. Need a hand? I just might." Warren's face is craggier than usual in the bright overhead light, his eyes and forehead shadowed by the brim of his cap so that his beaky nose seems bigger than it is. He's erect and intense, and though he's flabby in places, these are places where flab doesn't matter much. Behind him, the soft-colored lights of the Wurlitzer shine on the matte black nose of a Delta. He's the actual owner of the airfield, with Cowboy as secret partner. Cowboy doesn't like data trails that point in his direction. Warren fiddles with the part a while more, then takes measurements. He moves over to the lathe and puts on his goggles. Cowboy readies himself to hand him the tools when necessary. Spare parts are hard to find for military surplus jet engines, and the parts that are available often have too many questions attached. The lathe whines. Sparks spill like tiny meteors against the concrete floor. "I'm making a run Wednesday night," Cowboy says. "In 5 days. I can come down Monday and start my checks on the Panzer. Is that too late?" "Not for where I'm going." There is resentment in Cowboy's voice. "Iowa again? Hell yes." Anger flares in Cowboy's soul. Arkady and the others, they keep looking at their damn analyses, saying that the privateers are undercapitalized. All we have to do is wait and keep them from taking any cargoes. And it's wrong. You can't beat the Heat by playing their own game. We should be running into Missouri every night, making them eat fuel, ammo. Rock them if that's what it takes. He snorts, "Undercapitalized. See what the loss of a dozen aircraft will do for their cash flow." Warren looks up from the spinning lathe. "You running for Arkady on Wednesday night?" Cowboy nods. "I don't like the man. I wonder about him." Warren, in a studied way, is working the lathe again. His white hair sticking out from under his cap flashes in the light of sparks. Cowboy waits, knowing Warren will make his point in his own time. Warren turns off the lathe and pushes his goggles up above the brim of his cap. He came from nowhere in particular, and now he's the biggest third man in the Rockies. He's got sources of supply that the others can't match. Dresses in all those Cryo-Max fashions from the Florida Free Zone. So, he's got organization. And I don't like his clothes either. Warren holds up his gleaming alloy creation to the light, narrowing his eyes. He's supposed to be getting it through cutouts, hijackings, corrupt orbital executives, that sort of thing, the usual. But in this kind of quantity, you can't get that much in the way of goods without the orbitals knowing. A protesting whisper runs through Cowboy's mind. In it for the ride, not for the cargo. He's said it often enough. An ethic, this, a kind of purity. Half the time he hasn't even known what he's been carrying. I don't know if I want to hear this, he says. Don't hear it, then. Warren turns away and goes back to the pump. He puts on a headset and runs through some checks. Cowboy thinks for a moment about Arkady, the burly man who runs half the traffic across the line these days, who exists in a strange swirl of assistants, bodyguards, helpers, techs, hangers-on of no apparent function, who imitate his fashionable dress and his mannerisms. Women always present, but never a part of business. An existence cognate with what Cowboy can understand of Arkady's mind. Convoluted, filled with violent prejudices and hatreds. Sudden anger juxtaposed with sudden sentimentality. Suspicious in a strange, offhand Russian way, as if paranoia were a way of life, not merely a set of reasonable precautions, but a religion. Cowboy doesn't like Arkady, but hasn't so far bothered to dislike him. Arkady considers himself an insider, a manipulator, but he's outside what really counts. Outside the life of the Panzer boy, the mutant creature with turbine lungs and high-pressure turbo-pump heart, crystal implanted in his skull, eyes like lasers, fingers that point missiles, alcohol throbbing through his veins. Arkady thinks he's running things, but he's really just an instrument, an excuse for the Panzer boys to make their runs across the line and into legend. And if Arkady doesn't understand that, his thoughts don't count for much in the scheme of things. Warren is reassembling parts of the pump ready to run his tests and will be busy for a while. Cowboy leaves the pool of light and walks into the blackness of the hangar. The deltas loom above him, poised and ready, lacking only a pilot to make them living things. His hands reach up to touch a smooth underbelly, an epoxide canard, the fairing of a downward-gazing radar, like stroking a matte black animal, a half-wild thing too dangerous to be called a pet. It lacks only a pilot and a purpose. He moves a ladder from an engine access panel to a cockpit and climbs into the seat that was, years ago, molded to his body. The familiar metal and rubber smells warm to him. He closes his eyes and remembers the night splattered with brightness, the sudden flare of erupting fuel, the mad chase as, supersonic, he bobbed and weaved among the hills and valleys of the Ozarks, the laws on his tail burning for home. His first Delta was called Midnight Sun, but he changed the name after he'd figured out what was really going on. He and the other Delta jocks were not an abstract response to market conditions, but a continuation of some kind of mythology. Delivering the mail across the high dome of night despite all the oppressor's efforts to the contrary, keeping a light burning in the darkness, hope in the shape of an afterburner flame. The last free Americans on the last high road. So he'd begun to live what he suddenly knew, accepting the half-scornful, condescending nickname they'd given him, living it, becoming Cowboy, the air jock, answering to nothing else, becoming the best, living in realms higher than any of the competition. He called his next Delta Pony Express, and in it he delivered the mail as long as they'd let him. Till times changed, and modes of delivery changed, till he had to become a boy instead of a jock. The eyes that could focus into the night blackness, straining to spot the infrared signature of the laws riding combat air patrol over the prairie, were now shut in a small armored cabin, all the visuals coming in through remotes. He is still the best, still delivering the mail. He shifts in his seat. The country swing fades, and all Cowboy can hear in the echoing silence is the whir of Warren's lathe, and sense the restlessness in himself, wanting only a name. Chapter 2. Today, yes. Bodies and parts of bodies flare and die in laser light. Here the translucent sheen of eyes rimmed in coal, or turned up to a heaven masked by the starry glitter ceiling. Here electric hair flaring with fashionable static discharges. Here a blue-white glow of teeth rimmed in dark glow fire and pierced by mute extended tongue. It is zone dance. Though the band is loud and sweat-hot, many of the zoned are tuned to their own music through crystal wired delicately to the auditory nerves, or dancing to the headsets through which they can pick up any of the bar's 12 channels. They seethe in arrhythmic patterns, heedless of one another. Perfect control is sought, but there are accidents, impacts, a flurry of fists and elbows, and someone crawls out of the zone, whimpering through a blood-streaked hand, unnoticed by the pack. To Sarah, the dancers at the Aujourd'hui seem a twitching mass of dying flesh, bloody, insensate, mortal, bound by the mud of earth. They are meat. She is hunting, and Weasel is the name of her friend. Modern body, modern body, modern body, modern. Need a modern body? All electric, replaceable, in the mode, get one now. Body, modern body, modern body, modern body. The body designer had eyes of glittering violet above cheekbones of sculptured ivory. Her hair was a streaky blonde that swept to an architecturally perfect dorsal fin behind her nape. Her muscles were cat-like, and her mouth was a cruel flower. "Hair shorter, yes," she said. "One doesn't wear it long in free fall." Her fingers lashed out and seized Sarah by the chin, tilting her head to the cold north light. Her fingernails were violet to match her eyes, and sharp. Sarah glared at her, sullen. The body designer smiled. "A little pad in the chin, yes," she says. "You need a stronger chin. The tip of the nose can be altered. You're a bit too retroussé. The curve of the jawbone needs a little flattening. I'll bring my paring knife tomorrow. And of course we'll remove the scars. Those scars have got to go." Sarah curled her lip under the pressure of the violet-tipped fingers. The designer dropped Sarah's chin and whirled. "Must we use this girl, Cunningham?" she asked. "She has no style at all. She can't walk gracefully. Her body's too big, too awkward. She's nothing. She's dirt. Common." Cunningham sat silently in his brown suit, his neutral, unmemorable face giving away nothing. His voice was whispery, calm, yet still authoritative. Sarah thought it could be a computer voice, so devoid was it of highlights. "Our Sarah has style, Firebud," he said. "Style and discipline. You are to give it form, to fashion it. Her style must be a weapon, a shaped charge. You will make it, I will point it, and Sarah will punch a hole right where we intend she should." He looked at Sarah with his steady brown eyes. "Won't you, Sarah?" he asked. Sarah did not reply. Instead, she looked up at the body designer, drawing back her lips, showing teeth. "Let me hunt you some night, Firebud," she said. "I'll show you style." The designer rolled her eyes. "Dirt girl stuff," she snorted. But she took a step back. Sarah grinned. "And Firebud," Cunningham said, "leave the scars alone. They will speak to our princess of this cruel terrestrial reality that she helped create, that she dominates, with which she is already half in love." "Yes," he said, "leave the scars alone." For the first time he smiled, a brief tightening of the cheek muscles, cold as liquid nitrogen. "Our princess will love the scars," he said. "Love them till the very last." Winners, yes. Losers, yes. The Aujourd'hui is a jockey bar, and they are all here. Moon jocks and rig jocks, hold jocks and power jocks and rock jocks. The jocks condescending to share the floor with the mud boys and dirt girls who surround them. Those who hope to become them or love them or want simply to be near them, to touch them in the zone dance and absorb a piece of their radiance. The jocks wear their colors, vests and jackets bearing the emblems of their blocks. TRW, Pfizer, Toshiba, Tupolev, Aramco, the blazons of the rock war victors borne with careless pride by the jocks who had won them their place in the sky. 6 feet 3 inches in height, Sarah stalks among them in a black satin jacket, blazoned on its back with a white crane that rises to the starry firmament amid a flock of chrome-bright Chinese characters. It is the badge of a small block that does most of its business out of Singapore, and is hardly ever seen here in the Florida Free Zone. Her face is unknown to the regulars, but it is hoped they won't think it odd, not as odd as it would seem if she wore the badge of Tupolev or Kikuyu Optics IG. Her sculpted face is pale, the Florida tan gone, her eyes black-rimmed. Her almost black hair is short on the sides and brushy on top, her nape hair falling in 2 thin braids down her back. Chrome steel earrings brush her shoulders. Firebud has broadened her already broad shoulders and pared down the width of her pelvis. Her face is sharp and pointed beneath a widow's peak, looking like a succession of arrowheads, the shaped charge that Cunningham demands. She wears black dancing slippers laced over the ankles and dark purple stretch overalls with suspenders that frame her breasts, stretching the fabric over the nipples that Firebud has made more prominent. Her shirt is gauze, spangled with silver. Her neck scarf, black silk. There is a two-way spliced into her auditory nerve and a receiver tagged to the optic centers of her forebrain, at the moment monitoring police broadcasts, a constant Times Square of an LED running amber at will above her expanded vision. Gifts from Cunningham. Her hardwired nerves are her own. So is Weasel. "I love my Kikuyu eyes," says primo porno star Rod McLeish, "and with the infrared option, I can tell if my partner's really excited or if I'm just on a silicon ride." Kikuyu Optics IG, a division of Mikoyan Gurevich. She first met Cunningham in another bar, the Blue Silk. Sarah ran Weasel as per contract, but the snag boy, a runner who had got more greedy than he had the smarts to handle, had been altered himself. She was nursing bruises. She recovered the goods, fortunately, and since the contract was with the third men, she had been paid in endorphins, handy since she needed a few of them herself. There is a bone bruise on the back of her thigh, and she can't sit. Instead, she leans back against the padded bar and sips her rum and lime. The Blue Silk's audio system plays island music and soothes her played-up nerves. The Blue Silk is run by an ex-cutter jock named Maurice, a West Indian with the old model Zeiss eyes who was on the losing side in the Rock War. He's got chip sockets on his ankles and wrists, the way the military wore them then. There are pictures of his friends and heroes on the walls, all of them with the azure silk neck scarves of the elite Space Defense Corps, most of them framed with black mourning ribbons turning purple with the long years. Sarah wonders what he has seen with those eyes. Did it include the burst of X-rays that preceded the 10,000-ton rocks launched from the orbital mass drivers that tore through the atmosphere to crash on Earth's cities? The artificial meteors, each with the force of a nuclear blast, had first fallen in the eastern hemisphere, over Mombasa and Calcutta, and by the time the planet had rotated and made the western hemisphere a target, the Earth had surrendered. But the orbital blocks felt they hadn't made their point forcefully enough in the west, and so the rocks fell anyway. Communications foul up, they said. Earth's billions knew better. Sarah was 10. She was doing a tour in a youth reclamation camp near Stone Mountain when 3 rocks obliterated Atlanta and killed her mother. Daoud, who was 8, was trapped in the rubble, but the neighbors heard his screams and got him out. After that, Sarah and her brother bounced from one DP agency to another, then ended up in Tampa with her father, whom she hadn't seen or heard of since she was 3. The social worker held her hand all the way up the decaying apartment stairs, and Sarah held Daoud's. The halls stank of urine, and a dismembered doll lay strewn on the second-floor landing, broken apart like the nations of Earth, like the lives of the people here. When the apartment door opened, she saw a man in a torn shirt with sweat stains in the armpits and watery, alcoholic eyes. The eyes, uncomprehending, had moved from Sarah and Daoud and then to the social worker as the papers were served, and the social worker said, "This is your father. He'll take care of you," before dropping Sarah's hand. It turned out to be only half a lie. She looks at the fading photographs in their dusty frames, the dead men and women with their metallic Zeiss eyes. Maurice is looking at them too. He is lost in his memories, and it looks as if he is trying to cry. But his eyes are lubricated with silicone, and his tear ducts are gone, of course, along with his dreams, with the dreams of the 5 billion people who had hoped the orbitals would improve their lives, who have no hope now but to get out somehow, out into the cold, perfect cobalt of the sky. Sarah wishes she herself could cry, for the dead hope framed in black on the walls, for herself and Daoud, for the broken thing that is all earthly aspiration, even for the snag boy who had seen his chance to escape but had not been smart enough to play his way out of the game his hopes had dealt him into. But the tears are long gone, and in their place is hardened steel desire, the desire shared by all the dirt girls and mud boys. To achieve it, she has to want it more than the others, and she has to be willing to do what is necessary, or to have it done to her if it comes to that. Involuntarily, her hand rises to her throat as she thinks of Weasel. No, there is no time for tears. Looking for work, Sarah? The voice comes from the quiet white man who has been sitting at the end of the bar. He has come closer, one hand on the back of the bar stool next to her. He is smiling as if he is unaccustomed to it. She narrows her eyes as she looks at him sidelong and takes a deliberately long drink. "Not the kind of work you have in mind, collar boy," she says. "You come recommended," he says. His voice is sandpaper, the kind you never forget. Perhaps he'd never had to raise it in his life. She drinks again and looks at him. "By whom?" she says. The smile is gone now. The nondescript face looks at her wearily. "The hetman," he says. "Michael?" she asks. He nods. "My name is Cunningham," he says. "Do you mind if I call Michael and ask him?" she says. The hetman controls the Bay Third Men, and sometimes she runs the Weasel for him. She doesn't like the idea of his dropping her name to strangers. "If you like," Cunningham says. "But I'd like to talk to you about work first." "This isn't the bar I go to for work," she says. "See me in the Plastic Girl at 10. This isn't the sort of offer that can wait." Sarah turns her back to him and looks into Maurice's metal eyes. "This man," she says, "is bothering me." Maurice's face does not change expression. "You best leave," he says to Cunningham. Sarah, not looking at Cunningham, receives from the corner of her eye an impression of a spring uncoiling. Cunningham seems taller than he was a moment ago. "Do I get to finish my drink first?" he asks. Maurice, without looking down, reaches into the till and flicks bills onto the dark surface of the bar. "Drinks on the house. Out of my place." Cunningham says nothing, just gazes for a calm moment into the unblinking metal eyes. "Townsend," Maurice says, a code word and the name of the general who had once led him up against the orbitals and their burning defensive energies. The Blue Silk's hardware voice prints him, and the defensive systems appear from where they are hidden above the bar mirror, locking down into place. Sarah glances up. Military lasers, she thinks, scrounged on the black market, or maybe from Maurice's old cutter. She wonders if the bar has power enough to use them, or whether they are bluff. Cunningham stands still for another half-second, then turns and leaves the Blue Silk. Sarah does not watch him go. "Thanks, Maurice," she says. Maurice forces a sad smile. "Hell, lady," he says. "You a regular customer. And that fella's been orbital." Sarah contemplates her surprise. "He's from the blocks?" she asks. "You're sure?" "Innes," Maurice says. Another name from the past, and the lasers slot up into place. His hands flicker out to take the money from the bar. "I didn't say he's from the blocks, Sarah," he says, "but he's been there. Recently, too. You can tell from the way they walk if you got the eyes." He raises a gnarled finger to his head. "His ear, you know. Gravity created by centrifugal force is just a little bit different. It takes a while to adjust." Sarah frowns. What kind of job is the man offering? Something important enough to bring him down through the atmosphere? To hire some dirt girl and her weasel? It doesn't seem likely. Well, she'll see him in the plastic girl or not. She isn't going to worry about it. She shifts her weight from one leg to the other, the muscles crackling with pain even through the endorphin haze. She holds out her glass. "Another, please, Maurice," she says. With a slow grace that must have served him well in the high, starry Evernight, Maurice turns toward the mirror and reaches for the rum. Even in a gesture this simple, there is sadness. "Vive en la ciudad de dolor. Déjenos mandarle a Happyville." Pointsman Pharmaceuticals, AG. She takes a taxi home from the Blue Silk, trying to ignore Cunningham's calm eyes on the back of her head as she gives the driver her address. He is across the street under an awning, pretending to read a magazine. How much is she throwing away here? She doesn't turn to see if he registers dismay at her retreat, but somehow she doubts his expression has changed. With Daoud, she shares a two-room apartment that hums. There is the hum of the coolers and recyclers. More humming from the little glowing robots that move about randomly, doing the dusting and polishing, devouring insects and arachnids and cleaning the cobwebs out of corners. She has a modest comp deck in the front room, and Daoud has a vast audio system hooked to it, with a 6-foot screen to show the vid. It's on now, silently, showing computer-generated color patterns, broadcasting them with laser optics on the ceiling and walls. The computer is running the changes on red, and the walls burn with cold and silent fire. Sarah turns off the vid and looks down at the cooling comp deck, the reds fading slowly from her retinas. She empties the dirty ashtrays Daoud has left behind, thinking about the man in brown, Cunningham. The endorphins are wearing off, and the bone bruise on her thigh is hammering her with every step. It's time for another dose. She checks her hiding place on a shelf in a can of sugar and sees that 2 of her 12 vials of endorphin are gone. Daoud, of course. There aren't enough places to hide even small amounts of stuff in an apartment this size. She sighs, then ties her tourniquet above the elbow. She slots a vial into her injector, dials the dose she wants, and presses the injector to her arm. The injector hums, and she sees a bubble rise in the vial. Then there is a warning light on the injector, and she feels a tug of flesh as the needle slides on its cool spray of anesthetic into her vein. She unties, watches the LED on the injector pulse 10 times, and then she feels a veil slide between her and her pain. She takes a ragged breath, then stands. She leaves the injector on the sofa and walks back to the comp. Michael the Hetman is in his office when she calls. She speaks to him in Spanglish, and he laughs. "I thought I'd hear from you today, mi hermana," he says. "Yes," she asks. "You know this orbiter, Cunningham?" So. We done business. He has the highest recommendations." "Whose?" "The highest," he says. "So you recommend that I trust him?" Sarah asks. His laugh seems a little jangled. She wonders if he is high. "I never make that kind of recommendation, mi hermana," he says. "Yes, you would, Hetman," Sarah says. "If you are getting a piece of whatever it is Cunningham is doing. As it is, you're just doing him a favor." "Do svidaniya, my sister," says Michael, sounding annoyed, and snaps off. Sarah looks into the humming receiver and frowns. The door opens behind her and she spins and goes into her stance, balanced to jump forward or back. Daoud walks carelessly in the door. Behind him, carrying a 6-pack of beer, comes his manager, Jack Straw, a small young man with unquiet eyes. Daoud looks up at her, speaks through the cigarette held in his lips. "You expecting someone else?" he asks. She relaxes. "No," she says. "Just nerves. It's been a nervous day." Daoud's eyes move restlessly over the small apartment. He has altered the irises from brown to a pale blue, just as he'd altered the color of his hair, eyebrows, and lashes to a white blonde. He is tanned, and his hair is shoulder-length and shaggy. He wears tooled leather sandals and a tight white pair of slacks under a dark net shirt. He is taking hormone suppressants, and though he is 20, he looks 15 and is beardless. Sarah moves over to him and kisses him hello. "I'm working tonight," he says. He wants to have dinner. "I can't stay long." "Is it someone you know?" she asks. "Yes." He gives a shadowy grin meant to be reassuring. His blue eyes flicker. "I've been with him before." "Not a Thatch?" He shrugs out of her embrace and goes to sit on the sofa. "No," he mumbles. "An old guy. Lonely, I guess. Easy to please, wants to talk more than anything." He sees the plastic pack of endorphins and picks it up, searching through it. Sarah sees 2 more vials vanish between his fingers. "Daoud," she says, her voice a warning. "That's our food and rent. I've got to get it on the street." "Just one," Daoud says. He drops the other back in the bag, holds up one to let her see it. Cigarette ash drifts to the floor. "You've already had your share," Sarah says. His pale eyes flicker in his dark face. "Okay," he says. But he doesn't put the vial down. His need is too strong. She looks down and shakes her head. "1," she agrees. "Okay." He pockets it, then picks up the loaded injector and dials a dosage, a high dosage, she knows. She resists the urge to check the injector, knowing that someday, if he goes on this way, he'll put himself in a coma, but knowing how much he'd resent her concern. Sarah watches as the endorphin hits his head, as he lies back and sighs, his twitchy nervousness gone. She takes the injector and frees the vial, then puts it in the plastic bag. There is a half smile on Daoud's face as he looks up at her. "Thanks, Sarah," he says. "I love you," she says. He closes his eyes and strops his back on the sofa like a cat. His throat makes strange, whimpering noises. She takes the bag and walks into her room and throws the bag on her bed. A wave of sadness whispers through her veins like a drug of melancholy. Daoud will die before long, and she can't stop it. Once it had been she who stood between him and life. Now it was the endorphins that keep him insulated from the things that want to touch him. Their father had been crazy and violent, and half her scars were Daoud's by right. She had suffered them on his behalf, shielding him with her body. The madman's beatings had taught her to fight back, had made her hard and quick, but she couldn't be there all the time. The old man had sensed weakness in Daoud and found it. When Sarah was 14, she'd run with the first boy who'd promised her a place free from pain. 2 years later, when she'd bought her way out of her first contract and come back for him, Daoud had been shattered beyond repair, the needle already in his arm. She'd led him to the new house where she worked. It was the only place she had, and there he'd learned to earn his living, as she had learned in her own time. He is broken still, and as long as they are in the streets, there is no way of healing him. If she hadn't cracked, if she hadn't run away, she might have been able to protect him. She won't crack again. She returns to the other room and sees Daoud lying on the sofa, one sandal hanging with the straps tangled between his toes. Tobacco smoke drifts up from his nostrils. Jackstraw is sitting next to him on the sofa and drinking one of his beers. He glances up. "You look like you're limping," Jackstraw says. "Would you like me to rub your legs?" "No," Sarah says quickly, and then realizes she is being too sharp. "No," she says again with a smile. "Thank you, but it's a bone bruise. If you touched me, I'd scream." Artificial dreams. The plastic girl is a hustler's idea of the good life. There is a room for zone dance, and there are headsets that plug you into euphoric states or pornography or whatever it is you need and are afraid to shoot into your veins. Orbital pharmaceutical companies provide the effects free as advertising for their products. There are dancers on the mirrored bar in the back, a bar equipped with arcade games so that if you win, a connection snaps in one of the dancers' garments and it falls off. If you win big, all the clothes fall off all the dancers at once. Sarah is in the big front room. Brassy music, red leather booths, brass ornaments. She does not, and will probably never, rate the quiet room in the back, all brushed aluminum, and a lot of dark wood that might have been the last mahogany tree in Southeast Asia. That room is for the big boys who run this fast and dangerous world. And though there isn't a sign that says no women allowed, there might as well be. Sarah is an independent contractor and rates a certain amount of respect. But in the end, she is still meat for hire, though on a more elevated plane than once she was. But still, the red room is nice. There are holograms, colors and helixes like modeled DNA floating just above eye level, casting their variegated light through the crystal and sparkling liquor held in the patron's hands. And there are sockets at every table for comp decks, so that the patrons can keep up with their portfolios. And there are girls with reconstructed breasts and faces who come to each table in their tight plastic corsets, bring you your drink, and watch with identical and very white smiles as you put your credit needle into their tabulator and tap in a generous tip with your fingernail. She is ready for the meet with Cunningham, wearing a navy blue jacket guaranteed to protect her against kinetic violence of up to 900 foot-pounds per square inch, and trousers good for 750. She has invested some of the endorphins and bought the time of a pair of her peers. They are walking loose about the bar, ready to keep Cunningham or his friends off her back if she needs it. She knows she needs a clear head and has kept the endorphin dose down. Pain is making her edgy, and she still can't sit. She stands at a small table and sips her rum and lime, waiting. And then Cunningham is there. Bland face, brown eyes, brown hair, brown suit. a whispery voice that speaks of clean places she has never been, places bright and soft against the black and pure diamond. "Okay, Cunningham," she says. "Business." Cunningham's eyes flicker to the mirror behind her. "Friends?" he asks. "I don't know you." "You've called the hetman." She nods. "He was complimentary," she says. "But you're not working for him. He's repaying you a favor, maybe, so I'm cautious." "Understandable." He takes a comp deck out of an inner pocket and plugs it into the table. A pale amber screen in the depths of the dark tabletop lights up, displaying a row of figures. "We're offering you this in dollars," he says. Sarah feels a touch of metal on her nerves, on her tongue. The score, she thinks. The real thing. "Dollars?" she says. "Get serious." "Gold?" Another set of figures appears. She takes a sip of rum. "Too heavy." "Stock or drugs?" "Take your pick." "What kind of stock? What kind of drugs?" "Your choice." "Polymyxin phenyldorphin new. There's a shortage right now." Cunningham frowns. "If you like. But there'll be a lot of it coming onto the market in another 3 weeks or so." Her eyes challenge him. "Did you bring it down from orbit with you?" she asks. His face fails so much as to twitch. "No," he says. "But if I were you, I'd try chloramphenyldorphin. Pfizer is arranging an artificial scarcity that will last several months. Here are the figures. Pharmacological quality, fresh from orbit." Sarah looks at the amber numbers and nods. "Satisfactory," she says. "Half in advance." 10% now, Cunningham says. 30 on completion of training. The rest on completion of the contract, whether you succeed or not. She looks up at one of the bar's moving holograms. The colors clean and bright, as pure as if seen through a vacuum. A vacuum, she thinks. The stock isn't bad, but she can do more with the drugs. Cunningham is offering her the drugs at their orbital value, where they are made and where the cost is almost nothing. The street value is far more, and with it she can buy more stock than the amount they were offering. 10% of that figure is more than she'd made last night when she'd gone after the snag boy. To get into the orbitals, you have to have skills they need. Skills she can never acquire. There is another way. They can't refuse someone who owns enough shares. They are sucking up all of Earth's remaining wealth, and if you help them and buy up enough stock, they might free you from the mud forever. This is almost enough, she calculates. Almost enough for a pair of tickets to the top of the gravity well. She brings her drink to her lips. "Let's say a quarter now," she says. "And then I'll let you buy me a drink, and you can tell me just what you want me to do to earn it." Cunningham turns and signals to one of the smiling corset girls. "It's very simple," he says, and he looks at her with his ice-cold eyes. "We want you to make someone fall in love with you. Just for a night. Is your lover looking for someone younger? You can be that someone." "The princess is about 80 years old," Cunningham says. The holo he gives Sarah shows a pale blonde girl of about 20, dressed in a kind of ruffled blouse that exposes her rounded shoulders, the hollows of her clavicles. She has Daoud's watery blue eyes and freckles above her breasts. She projects an air of vulnerable innocence. "We think he was originally from Russia," Cunningham goes on, "but the Korolev Bureau has always been secretive, and we don't have a complete list of their senior staff and designers. When he rated the new body, he asked to be a woman. He's important enough so that they gave it to him, but they gave him a demotion. They rotate out all their old people to make way for the new. She's doing courier duty now." Not unusual, Sarah thinks. These days you can get pornography read straight into the brain, plenty of chances to sample whatever pleasures you like, and then, if rich enough, get yourself a new body to suit your tastes. But the technology of personality transfer is imperfect. Sometimes bits get left behind. Memories, abilities, traits that might be useful. A succession of bodies can mean successive senility. If you get a new body and aren't so powerful you can't be moved, you are often demoted until you can prove yourself. What's her new name, she asks. She'll tell you, I'm sure. Let's just call her Princess for now. Sarah shrugs. There are half a dozen imbecilic security rules in this operation, and she guesses that most of them are simply to test her capacity for obedience. Her new body doesn't seem to have altered his sexual orientation, just his manner of expressing it, Cunningham says. Princess has exhibited some characteristic behaviors since she started her new job. When she's on the ground, she likes to go slumming, find herself a working girl, sometimes a dirt girl, most often a jock, and take her home for a night or two. She wants a pet, but a dangerous one. Not too clean, a little rough. Not too removed from the street, but civilized enough to know how to please. Not a Thatch. That's me? Sarah asks with no surprise. Her new pet? We've researched you. You were a licensed prostitute for 5 years and rated highly by your employers. 5.5, she says. And not with girls. He's a man, really. An old man. Why should it be hard for you? Sarah looks at the blonde, freckled girl in the hollow, trying to find the old Russian in those eyes. The look that was always the same, wanting her to be some piece of private fantasy. Real, but not too real. Orgasms genuine, but never with genuine passion. The plastic girl, an object for things that grew hidden in their minds, something they could get rid of quickly and never have to take home. They were upset somehow if you didn't understand their fantasy right away. After a while, she had got so that she could. No different from all the other old men, she thinks. She looks at the picture. Not really. They want power over their own flesh and another's. Pay not so much for sex, but for power over sex, over the thing that threatens to control them. And so they take their passion and use it to control others. She understands control, all right. She looks up at Cunningham. Did they give you a new body as well, she asks. Guaranteed inconspicuous? Or did you have Firebud make you over so that you had no style at all? He gazes at her steadily, the same calm gaze. She can't seem to touch it or him. I can't say, he says. How long have you worked for them, she asks. You were a mud boy once. You don't have the look that they do. But you work for them now. Is that what they promised you? A new body when you get old? And if you die on one of these jobs here in the mud, a nice funeral with the corporate anthem sung over your body? Something like that, he agrees. Got your heart and soul, have they? She asks. That's how they want it, dryly accepting. He knows the price of his ticket. Control, she says. You understand that. You are owned by people who worship control, and so you control yourself well. But you're a pressure cooker, and the steam is just under the surface. Do you go slumming in your off hours like Princess? To the clubs, to the houses? Are you one of my old customers? She gazes into his expressionless eyes. You could be, she says. I never remembered faces. As it happens, I'm not, he says. I never saw you before I was given this assignment. He is beginning to look a little out of patience. Sarah grins. Don't worry, she says, and throws the holo of Princess on the table. I'll do your owners proud. I'm sure you will, he says. They won't have it any other way. In the zone, yes. Like Times Square neon, the amber LED tracks across the upper limits of Sarah's vision, just where the shadow of her brows would be. Princess moving, princess moving, princess moving. The Aujourd'hui is Princess's favorite spot. But there are others. Sarah should be ready to move at need. The washroom at the Aujourd'hui is a conglomeration of mirrors and soft white lights, red flock on the gold wallpaper, bronze water spouts above the sinks, chromed dispensers that offer tissue for the adjustment of makeup. Sarah shoulders through the door, and a pair of dirt girls standing in front of the mirrors glance at her. There is envy in their glance and a kind of desperate awe, and then the eyes turn self-consciously back to the mirrors. The satin jacket represents something they want and will most likely never have. The freedom of the white crane to climb into the sky amid the silver glitter of stars. Sarah is suddenly aware of the sound of sobbing, magnified by the low ceiling, the hard edges of the room. The dirt girl's eyes stay fixed in their own reflections as she passes and steps into a stall. It is the girl in the next stall who is weeping, pausing only to draw massive, shuddering breaths before bringing the air out again through the tortured muscles of the throat. It hurts to cry that hard, Sarah knows. The ribs feel as if they are breaking. The stall shudders to the impact as the girl drives her head against its wall. And Sarah knows that it is pain the girl is seeking, perhaps to drive out pain of another kind. Sarah tries not to get between people and what they need. To the sound of the impacts, Sarah takes her inhaler from her belt, puts it to her nose, and triggers it. There is a brief hiss of compressed gas. Sarah throws her head back, feeling the rush of hard fire racing along her nerve paths. The stall quakes. Sarah inhales again, using the other nostril, and she feels her body go warm and then cold, the hair on her forearms prickling. Her lips peel back from her teeth, and she feels at once abnormally sensitive and abnormally hard, as if her skin is made of razor blades that can feel every mote of dust. She needs the bite of the drug, needs it to give herself that extra piece of conviction. She hadn't mentioned it to Cunningham. The hell with him. She'll play it her own way. Princess moving, princess moving. The other girl's weeping is a whining, grating sound, like a saw on bone, syncopated with the hysterical crashing as she smashes again and again into the divider. Sarah can see flecks of blood daubing the floor of the next stall. She opens her door and sweeps through the room, past the dirt girls, whose eyes stand out pale amid their rimming of coal as they gaze at each other and wonder what to do about the sobbing casualty. Princess Aujourd'hui, repeat Aujourd'hui, am switching police transmissions, good hunting, Cunningham. Sarah blinks as she steps into the darkness of the club, feeling the hard fire impelling her limbs to motion, and she rides the drug like a jock on the flaming Roman candle of a booster, climbing for the edge of the sky and still in control. The corners of the room, the dancers and fixtures flare like liquid crystal kaleidoscopes. And then Princess comes, and Sarah's motion freezes. Princess is surrounded by dirt boy muscle, but she stands out clearly in the dark. There is an aura about her, a glow. She has the look as none of them have, a soft radiance that speaks of luxury, soft and carefree joys, freedom even from gravity, a life even the jocks can't share. It seems as if there is a pause in the music as the room inhales in mutual awe. 200 eyes can see the glow, and 100 mouths hungry for it begin to salivate. Sarah feels her body tingle, flares of nerve warmth at her fingertips. She is ready. Sarah gives a soft private laugh, as if her triumph were already a fact, and walks long-legged across the darkened bar as Firebud has taught her, swinging her broad shoulders in counterpoint to her hips, insinuant animal style. She gives a grin to the muscle, and holds her hands palms out to show them she carries no weapons. And then Princess stands before her. She is a good 4 inches shorter, and Sarah looks down at her, hands cocked on her hips, challenging. Princess's soft blonde hair is worn long, ringlets playing with her cheeks, her ears. Her eyes are circled with vast blooms of purple and yellow makeup to look like bruises, making public the secret wish of a translucent white face that has never known pain. Her mouth is a deep violet, another laceration. Sarah cocks her head back and laughs low, baring her teeth, and thinks of the sounds hyenas make on the hunt. "Dance with me, princess," she says to the wide cornflower eyes. "I am your wildest dreams." Practice creates perfection. Perfection creates power. Power conquers law. Law creates heaven. A helpful reminder from Toshiba. Nicole has a cigarette in the corner of her mouth and wears a jacket of cracked brown leather. She has dark blonde hair that reaches down her back in tawny strands, and long, deep gray eyes that look up at Sarah without a flicker. Cunningham stands behind her with his two assistants. One is huge, a muscle man with no neck. The other is small, blonde, and has even less to say than Cunningham. Sarah thinks the smaller is the more dangerous of the two. "You can't hesitate for a second, Sarah," Cunningham says. "Not even the fragment of a second. Princess will know it and know there's something wrong. Nicole is here for that. You are to practice with her." Sarah looks at Nicole for a moment of surprise and then barks a laugh. Anger bubbles in her, whitely, coolly, like flares on the night horizon. "I suppose you plan to watch, Cunningham," she says. He nods. "Yes," he says. "I and Firebud. You seemed uncertain at first about making love to a woman." Nicole draws slowly on her cigarette and says nothing. "Make a vid record, perhaps?" Sarah asks. "Give me post-game critique?" She curls her lip. "Is that your particular pleasure, Cunningham?" she demands. "Does watching this kind of vid keep your demons away?" "We'll destroy the vids together, if you like. Afterward," Cunningham says. His no-neck assistant grins. The other watches her, expressionless as his chief. Sarah has been 2 months in training, has had her body altered and surgical work done, and all along she has been their willing dirt girl. But however many candidates had been in Cunningham's files, she is sure she's the only hope now, the only charge Cunningham will have shaped by the time Princess next comes down from orbit, and she knows now she has power of her own. They will have to go with her, or the project will fail, and it is time they knew it. She shakes her head slowly. "I don't think so, Cunningham," she says. "I'll be ready on the night, but I'm not now, and I'm not going to be. Not for you, not for your cameras." Cunningham does not reply. He seems to squint a little, as if suddenly the light is stronger. Nicole watches Sarah with smoky eyes, then shakes her long hair and speaks. "Just dance with me, then." Her words come a little too abruptly, as if impelled by some form of desperation, and Sarah wonders what she has been promised, how she has been made vulnerable to them. When she speaks, her voice gives her away. It is so much younger than her pose. "Just dance a little," she says. "It'll be all right." Sarah turns her gaze from Cunningham to Nicole and back, then nods. "Will a few dances satisfy you, Cunningham?" she asks. "Or do we end the program where we stand?" His jaw muscles tighten, and for a moment Sarah thinks the business is done, that it's over. Then he nods, still facing her. "Yes," he says, "if it has to be that way." "That's how it has to be," she says. There is a moment of silence, then Cunningham nods again as if to himself, and turns away. Nicole gives a nervous smile, wanting to please, not knowing who is her ticket to whatever it is she needs. Cunningham walks to the sound deck and presses a switch. Music buffets the walls. He turns back and folds his arms, waiting. Nicole closes her eyes and shrugs out of her jacket. Either they have gone out of their way to find a woman of Princess's build, or they have been lucky. Sarah watches as Nicole sways her body to the music, the plastic girl, waiting blindly to take an impression. She steps forward and takes the girl's hands in her own. Delta 3 emergency, attempted suicide, aujourd'hui emergency. Deep in her zone, Sarah shakes her head to clear the sweat from her eyes and feels the hard fire biting her veins. Princess has been her partner all night. She leaps and spins, and Princess watches with gleaming eyes, admiring. She feels like the crane on her back, arms stretching out to fly on pinions of purest silver. Sarah changes zones, and Princess follows, letting her give a name to their motion, their liquid pattern. She is bringing Princess in closer until, like a wave, she can fall upon her from her crest of foaming white. There is an intrusion into the zone, an attempted alteration in the pattern. Sarah whirls, an elbow digging deep into ribs, the zone boy doubling with the impact. He slices at his neck with a sword hand, and the boy flies from the zone whimpering. Princess is watching, rapt with glowing admiration. Sarah steps to her and catches her about the waist, and they spin like skaters on the edge of sharpened blades. "Am I the danger that you want?" she asks. The blue eyes give an answer. "I know you, old man," Sarah thinks in triumph, and bends her head to devour the violet lips, feasting like a raptor on her prey. The eyes of Princess widen, held in Sarah's gaze. Her lips taste of salt and blood. Modern body, modern body, modern body, modern... You can't claim you're a cyborg till you have a modern body sexual implant, undetectable. Gives you the power to last all night. Orgasm chips optional. Your partner will thank you for it. Earn body, modern body, modern body, modern body. Cunningham's car hisses through the night on speed-blurred wheels. Holograms slide past the windows in neon array. Sarah watches the back of the driver's neck as it swells from its collar. "It'll be best if you go alone to the club," Cunningham says. "Princess may send some of her people ahead, and you don't want to be seen with anyone." Sarah nods. He's given these instructions before, and she can recite them word for word, even do a fair imitation of the whispery monotone. She nods to show she's listening. Earlier this afternoon, she'd collected the second payment of chloramphenyldorphin, and her mind is occupied chiefly with ways of putting it on the street. "Sarah," he says, and reaches into a pocket. "I want you to have this, just in case." His hand comes up with a small aerosol bottle. "Yes?" she asks. She sprays it on the back of her hand, touches it, sniffs. "Silicone lubricant," he says. "The scent is right and should last for hours. Use it in the washroom if you find that you aren't really attracted to her." Sarah caps the bottle and holds it out to him. "I don't plan for it to go that far," she says. He shakes his head. "Just in case," he says. "We don't know what happens when you go behind her walls." She holds it out, expectant. Then, when he doesn't respond, she shrugs and puts it in her belt pouch. She rests her reshaped jaw on her hand and stares out the window, the hologram adverts reflecting in her dark eyes until the car slides to a stop at the door of her apartment. She reaches for the latch and opens it, steps out. The heat of the outside covers her like a smothering blanket, and she can feel the sweat springing up on her forehead. Cunningham sits huddled in his seat, somehow smaller than he had been. Up until now, until the firing of his shaped charge, he'd been in control. But now he's committed her to action, and all he is able to do is watch the result and hope he calculated the ballistics correctly. His jaw muscles twitch in a tight smile, and he raises a hand. "Thanks," she says, knowing he's wished her luck without actually risking a curse by saying it. And she turns away and breathes out and feels a lightness in her body and heart, as if the gravity were somehow lessened. All she has left is the job. No more pleasing Cunningham, No more rules or training, no more listening to Firebud criticizing the very way she walked, the way she held her head. All that is behind. The apartment is splashed with video color, and she knows Daoud is home. He's cleared the coffee table from the center of the room and is doing his exercises. The weights in his hands, the burning holograms outlining his naked body, his hairless genitals. She kisses his cheek. "Dinner?" she asks. "I'm going with Jack Straw. He wants me to meet someone." "Someone new?" "Yes. It's a lot of money." He drops the weights and lowers himself to the floor, begins strapping another set of weights to his ankles. She stands over him with a frown. "How much?" she asks. He gives her a quick glance, green laser fire winking from his eye whites. Then he looks down. His voice is directed to the floor. 8,000, he says. "That's a lot," she says. He nods and stretches his back on the ground, raising his legs against the strain of the weights. He points his feet, and she can see the muscles taut on the tops of his thighs. She slips out of her shoes and flexes her toes in the carpet. "What does he want for it?" she asks. Daoud shrugs. Sarah crouches and looks down at him. She feels a tightness in her throat. She repeats her question. "Jackstraw will be in the next room," he says. "If anything goes wrong, he'll know." "He's a Thatch, isn't he?" She can see the Adam's apple bob as Daoud swallows. He nods silently. She takes a breath and watches him strain against the weights. Then he sits up. His eyes are cold. "You don't have to do this," she says. "It's a lot of money," he repeats. "Tomorrow my job will be over," she says. "It'll pay enough for a long time, almost enough for a pair of tickets out." He shakes his head, then springs to his feet and turns his back. He walks toward the shower. "I don't want your money," he says. "Your tickets either." "Daoud," she says. He whirls around and she can see his anger. "Your job," he spits. "You think I don't know what it is you do?" She rises from her crouch, and for a moment she can see fear in his eyes. Fear of her? A wedge of doubt enters her mind. "You know what I do, yes," she says. "You also know why." "Because some man went Thatch once," he says, "and because when you got loose you killed him and liked it. I know the stories on the street." She feels a constriction in her chest. She shakes her head slowly. "No," she says. "It's for us, Daoud, to get us out, into the orbitals." She comes up to him to touch him, and he flinches. She drops her hand. "Where it's clean, Daoud," she says. "Where we're not in the street because there isn't a street." Daoud gives a contemptuous laugh. "There isn't a street there?" he asks. "So what will we do, Sarah? Punch code in some little office?" He shakes his head. "No, Sarah," he says. "We'd do what we've always done, but it will be for them, not for us." "No," she says. "It'll be different. Something we haven't known, something finer." "You should see your eyes when you say that," Daoud says. "Like you've just put a needle in your veins. Like that hope is your drug and you're hooked on it." He looks at her soberly, all his anger gone. "No, Sarah," he says. "I know what I am and what you are. I don't want your hope or your tickets, especially tickets with blood on them." He turns away again, and her answer comes quick and angry, striking for his weakness, for the heart, like a weasel. "You don't mind stealing my bloody endorphins, I've noticed," she says. His back stiffens for a moment. Then he walks on. Heat stings Sarah's eyes. She blinks back, tears. "Daoud," she says, "don't go with a Thatch, please." He pauses at the door, hand on the jamb. "What's the difference?" he asks. "Going with a Thatch or living with you?" The door closes, and Sarah can only stand and fight a helpless war with her anger and tears. She spins and stalks into her room. Her hard-wired nerves are crackling, the adrenaline triggering her reflexes, and she only stops herself from trying to drive a fist through the wall. She can taste death on her tongue and wants to run the weasel as fast as she can. The holograph of Princess sits on her chest of drawers. She takes it and stares at it, seeing the creamy shoulders, the blue innocence in the eyes, an innocence as false as Daoud's. Tomorrow, no. Sarah and Princess follow the ambulance men out of the Aujourd'hui. They are carrying the girl from the washroom stall. She has clawed her cheeks and breasts with her fingernails. Her face is a swollen cloud of bruises. Her nose blue pulp. Her lips are split and bloody. She is still trying to weep, but lacks the strength. Sarah can see Princess's excitement glittering in her eyes. This is the touch of the world she craves, warm and sweaty and real, flavored with the very soil of old earth. Princess stands on the hot sidewalk while her dirt boys circle and call for the cars. Sarah puts her arm around her and whispers in her ear, telling her what Sarah knows she wants. I am your dream. My name is Danica, Princess says. In the back of the car there is a smell of sweat and expensive scent. Sarah begins to devour Danica, licking and biting and breathing her in. She left the silicone spray at home but won't be needing it. Danica has Daoud's eyes and hair and smooth flesh, and Sarah finds herself wanting to touch her, to make a feast of her. The car passes smoothly through gates of hardened alloy, and they are in the nest. None of Cunningham's people ever got this far. Danica takes Sarah's hand and leads her in. A security man insists on a check. Sarah looks down at him with a contemptuous stare and spreads the wings of her jacket, letting his electronic marvel scout her body. She knows Weasel is undetectable by these means. The boy confiscates her heartfire inhaler. Fine. It is made so as not to acquire fingerprints. What are these? He asks, holding up the hard black cubes of liquid crystal, ready for insertion into a comp deck. Music, she says. He shrugs and gives them back. Princess takes her hand again and leads her up a long stair. Her room is soft and azure. She laughs and lies back on sheets that match her eyes, arms outstretched. Sarah bends over and laps at her. Danica moans softly, approving. She is an old man and a powerful one, and Sarah knows this game. His job is to rape Earth, to be as strong as space-borne alloy, and it is weakness that is his forbidden thing, his pornography. To put his bright new body into the hands of a slave is a weakness he wants more than life itself. My dream, Danica whispers. Her fingers trace the scars on Sarah's cheek, her chin. Sarah takes a deep breath. Her tongue retracts into Weasel's implastic housing, and the cyber snake's head closes over it. She rolls Danica entirely under her, holding her wrists, molding herself to the old man's new girl body. She presses her mouth to Danica's, feeling the flutter of the girl's tongue, and then Weasel strikes, telescoping from its hiding place in Sarah's throat and chest. Sarah holds her breath as her elastic artificial trachea constricts. Danica's eyes open wide as she feels the touch of Weasel in her mouth. The temperature of Sarah's body, but somehow cold and brittle. Sarah's fingers clamp on her wrists, and Princess gives a birth-strangled cry as Weasel's head forces its way down her throat. Her body bucks once, again, her breath warm in Sarah's face. Weasel keeps uncoiling, following its program, sliding down into the stomach, its sensors questing for life. Daoud's eyes make desperate promises. Princess moans in fear, using his strength against Sarah's weight, trying to throw her off. Sarah holds him crucified. Weasel, turning back on itself as it enters Danica's stomach, tears its way out, seeks the cava inferior, and shreds it. Danica makes bubbling sounds, and though Sarah knows it is impossible, Although she knows her tongue is still retracted deep into Weasel's base, Sarah thinks she can taste blood.
I think you're going to be happy with
Weasel follows the vein to Danica's heart. Sarah holds her down, her own chest near bursting with lack of air, until the struggling stops, and Daoud's blue eyes grow cloudy and die. Purple and black rim Sarah's vision. She heaves herself off the bed, partly retracting Weasel as she gasps for air through the constricted passage in her throat. She stumbles for the washroom, falls, and crashes into the sink. The impact drives the air from her. Her hands turn the spigots. Her hands put Weasel in the sink and feel the water running chill. Her breath comes in rasps. Weasel is coated in a gel that supposedly prevents blood and matter from adhering, but she doesn't want even a chance of Danica's flesh in her mouth. The cyber snake is tearing at her breast. The water thunders until she can feel nothing but the speed with which she is falling into blackness.
I think you're going to be
And
happy
then
with
she
that.
falls back and sucks Weasel into her and can breathe again and taste the cool and healing air. Her chest heaves up and down, and her eyes are still full of darkness. She knows Daoud is dead, and that she has a task. She whips her head back and forth and tries to clear it, tries to scrabble upward from the brink. But Weasel is eating her heart, and she can scarcely think from the pain. Sarah can hear herself whimper. She can feel the prickle of the carpet against the back of her neck as she raises her arms above her head and tries to drag herself along, crawling away, crawling, while Weasel throbs like thunder in her chest, and she thinks she can hear her heart crack. Sarah comes to herself slowly, and the black circle fades from her sight. She is lying on her back, and the water is still roaring in the sink. She sits up and clutches at her throat. Weasel, having fed, is at rest. She crawls back to the sink and turns the spigots off. Grasping them, she hauls herself to her feet. She still has work to do. In her room, Princess is spread-eagled on the bed. Dead, it is easier to see the old man in her. Sarah's stomach turns over. She should drag Princess across the bed and tuck her under the covers, delaying the moment when they find her. But she can't bring herself to touch the cooling flesh, and instead she turns her eyes away and steps into the next room. She pauses as her eyes adjust to the dim light and listens to the house. Silence. She reads the amber lights above her vision and can find only routine broadcasts. Sarah takes a pair of gloves from her belt pouch and walks to the room's comp deck. She flicks it on, then opens the trap door and takes from her pouch one of the liquid crystal music cubes Cunningham has given her. She puts it in the trap door and waits for the deck to signal her. The cube would in fact have played music had anyone else used it. Sarah has the code to convert it to something else. The ready signal appears. She taps the keys in near silence as she enters the codes. A pale light flashes in the corner of the screen. Running. She leans back in her chair and sighs. Princess was a courier, bringing from orbit a liquid crystal cube filled with complex instructions. Instructions her company dared not trust even to coded radio transmissions. Princess would not have known what she carried, though presumably it contained inventory data, strategies for manipulating the market, instructions to subordinates, buying and selling strategies. Information worth millions to any competitor. The crystal cube would have been altered to a new configuration once the information was removed to the company computer. A computer sealed against any outside tampering, but which could presumably be accessed through the terminals in the corporate suites. Sarah also has no clear idea what is on the cube she is carrying. Some kind of powerful theft program, she presumes, to break its way through the barriers surrounding the information so that it can be copied. She does not know how good her program is, whether it's setting off every alarm in Florida or whether it's accomplishing its business stealthily. If it's very good, it will not only copy the information, but alter it as well, planting a flow of disinformation at the heart of the enemy code, perhaps even altering the instructions as well, sabotaging the enemy's marketing patterns. While the running light blinks, Sarah stands and goes over every part of the suite she might have touched, stroking anything that could retain a print with her gloved fingertips. The house and Princess are silent. It is 11 minutes before the computer signals ready. Sarah extracts the cube and returns it to her belt. She has been told to wait a few hours, but there is someone dead in the next room, and every nerve screams at her to run. She sits before the comp deck and puts her head between her legs, gulping air. For some reason, she finds herself trembling. She battles the adrenaline and her own nerves, and thinks of the tickets, the cool dark of space with the blue limb of Earth far below, forever out of reach. In 2 hours, she calls a cab and walks down the cold, echoing stair. The security man nods at her as she walks out. His job is to keep people from coming in, not to hinder their leaving. He even gives her the inhaler back. She takes a dozen cabs to a dozen different places, leaving the satin jacket in one, cinching her waist in tighter and removing the suspenders in another. In a third, reversing her t-shirt and her belt pouch, both now glowing yellow like a warning light. The jockey persona is gone, and she is dirt again. She finishes her journey at the Plastic Girl, the place still running flat out at 4 a.m. As she enters, the sounds of dirt life assault her, and she takes comfort. This is her world, and she knows all the warm places where she can hide. She takes a room in the back and calls Cunningham. "Come and get your cube," she says, and then orders rum and lime. By the time he arrives, she's rented an analyzer and some muscle. He comes in alone, a package in his hand. He closes the door behind him. "Princess?" he asks. "Dead." Cunningham nods. The cube is on the table before her. She holds out a hand. "Let me see what you've got," she says. She checks 3 vials at random, and the analyzer tells her it's chloramphenyldorphin, purity 98% or better. She smiles. "Take your cube," she says. But he plugs it into the room's deck first, making sure it has what he wants. Then he puts it in his pocket and heads for the door. "If you have another job," she says, "you know where to find me."